Alright, so let's talk about energy in ecosystems. First of all, let's have a look at the syllabus objectives. Through food chains, energy flow diagrams and ecological pyramids, we need to be able to determine efficiencies of energy and biomass transfer, gross and net productivity, and also loss of energy through radiation, reflection and absorption. Okay, so first of all, let's have a look at some definitions. So biomass, that's the dry weight of all organic matter. So it's a way that we can consider the energy in an ecosystem, because the chemical energy stored in organic matter is in the bonds between the atoms of that organic matter. So, glucose and onwards from there, the chemical energy is stored within those bonds. So biomass is a way of looking at energy. Trophic, we've seen the word trophic when we think about autotrophic or heterotrophic. So trophic basically means feeding and nutrition, and we're going to look at trophic levels. Productivity is a way we can look at the rate of generation of biomass in an ecosystem. How effectively can organisms actually generate and pass on biomass? And detritus is a word that's going to come up as well. Basically, that's dead organic matter, including dead animals, leaf litter, dead dead plant material, and feces. So this still contains that chemical energy because it hasn't been consumed. Alright, so first of all, with trophic levels, one way that we can describe the different levels of a food chain or a food web is through trophic levels. And the first one is called the producers, or the autotrophs. These are the ones that convert energy from the sun, light energy, into organic matter, or into light energy into chemical energy. And then we've got our consumers, so primary consumers, secondary, tertiary, etc. But then we've also got our decomposers and our detritivores. Now they're not parts of these trophic levels because they are involved in decomposing or breaking down all levels of a food chain or food web. So let's have a look at the difference between decomposers and detritivores. So decomposers and detritivores both feed on detritus, which is that dead organic matter, dead organisms, undigested food, feces, etc. The difference is that detritivores, they use internal digestion, so they eat that dead organic matter. So worms, crustaceans, etc. Whereas decomposers do external digestion, so fungus, etc. They actually digest external to their body, so they release enzymes into the detritus, and those chemical enzymes break up the detritus into smaller components, which are then sucked in to the fungus. So how do we remember this? So detritivore has eyes in it, so that's how we think about internal digestion. Now these are really important for recycling nutrients through the biosphere, and we're going to look at that later when we look at the biogeochemical cycles, like the carbon and the nitrogen cycle. Now, one of the things that we need to consider is how energy is lost through radiation, reflection, and absorption. So most of the energy, the light energy that hits the Earth from the sun, doesn't actually contribute to photosynthesis. Some of it's just reflected off light surfaces like rocks, clouds, water, other parts of plants that don't actually are involved in photosynthesis. Some of it is absorbed, so like rocks, for example, might absorb light energy and convert that to heat. And then, of course, that heat can then be radiated back into space. So all of these ways, light is, converted from light energy. So all of these ways are ways in which the energy, light energy, is sent back out into space without actually being used for photosynthesis. So that's, I guess, one way in which we can consider that ecosystems are inefficient at energy transfer and transformation. Let's have a look at others. We say that energy transfer between those different trophic levels is actually inefficient because most of the energy is lost to the environment as heat. Now, essentially what we mean there is that the energy from the trophic level, so the primary consumers eat the primary producers, and they use much of that energy in the food that they eat to do cellular respiration, to make ATP, which they use for their muscles and growth and repair and all of those things, and ultimately that energy is lost as heat. There's other parts that don't get consumed, or the food that they consume, for example, they might eat the plants, but they actually pass some of that through as waste, as undigested food. So through both of these, energy lost as heat, energy lost to decomposes, only around about 10% of the energy from the previous level actually gets transferred up. So as you can see, it's 10%, 10%, 10%. So very little is actually available for these apex predators, and that then limits the number of levels, trophic levels in an ecosystem. So gross and net productivity. The way we can think about this is that on my pay slip, I see my gross pay, which is my pay before all the deductions come out, like Medicare and tax and super. And the net productivity, or the net pay I should say, is what I get in my bank account. So gross is the total, and net is what's left over. So if you think about it in terms of productivity, gross productivity is all of the energy that an organism obtains. So they obtain it either from photosynthesis, so converting light energy to chemical energy if they're producers, or if they're consumers, the energy they obtain from consuming other biological or organic matter. Now, of that energy that gets consumed, that's the gross productivity, then we have our deductions. So the energy that gets lost as heat from cellular respiration, and the energy that gets lost as detritus, so dropped leaves, undigested food, the organism, when it dies, all of that stuff is detritus. So what actually goes into what the energy that remains in the organism after all that is lost is our net productivity. And that's the energy that's available to pass on to the next trophic level. So we can work out the energy efficiency of this trophic level by saying 10 divided by 100. So that's like, that's going to be 0.2 times by 100 works out to be 20%. So the energy efficiency of this trophic level is 20%. And we're going to look at more of that in a minute. All right, so here's a summary of productivity. Gross productivity, the total amount of energy or biomass that an organism obtains, either by capturing it in photosynthesis, so capturing light, or consuming it if you're a consumer. Net productivity is the energy or biomass. So we can say biomass as well because it's the energy is stored in that biomass. The energy or biomass remaining in and I say in an organism's tissue, so whether it's plant tissue or whether it's animal tissue, that's that energy then that is stored in the tissue that will then pass on to the next trophic level if it's consumed. So in an organism's tissue, after energy used up in cellular respiration and lost as detritus. So that's the definitions then. Now there's different ways that we can represent this energy transfer through an ecosystem. One way is a food chain, which represents one single series of trophic levels, and the arrow goes in the direction of the movement of energy. Again, I haven't got a producer here, but we've got our primary consumers, etc. as we go up. So that's a food chain. A more complex version of that is called a food web, when it's a combination of multiple food chains, and it shows a more complex relationship. Now, so the energy flow through an ecosystem is inefficient. So it limits the number of levels or trophic levels that we can have in an ecosystem because it simply runs out of energy. And for that reason, we rarely have more than 6 steps. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 here. Very rarely do we have many more than that. And it tends to be more inefficient as we go further up the food chain as well. And the reason for that is that more energy is lost to respiration and heat and to decomposers. So why is that? Our tertiary or our apex predators, the top of our food chain, they tend to be larger organisms. They tend to be more active organisms. So they tend to use more energy and lose that as heat. But also because they're larger organisms and they don't get eaten by anything else, there's more for decomposers at the end of their lives. So we see that as we go further up, we tend to have less energy pass from one to the next. Now, another way we can represent this is through ecological pyramids. Again, this synergy between biomass and energy. It's a graphical representation of the relationship between different living organisms at different trophic levels. So the size of these try to reflect the amount of energy or biomass that's available. So pyramids of biomass, so this is that dry biomass of the ecosystem. And it can show, like in an aquatic ecosystem, we can see that the producers are actually smaller than the primary consumers. And that's because they have a high production rate, high primary production rate. Now, one thing we can do to quantify this energy transfer is to determine how much energy is actually passed from one trophic level to the next. So we can see we have 7,000 in the producers and 700 in the first order consumers. So we can see that that's going to be 10% energy that has been transferred from one to the other. And if we have a look at the formula for that, the percentage energy transfer is identifying the energy that's transferred to the next trophic level divided by the energy at the current level. So if we have a look at this next one, and times by 100. So if we have a look at this next one, so we've got 700 and then to 70 in the second order. So that would be 70 divided by 700 times by 100 is, again, 10%. We'll look at a few more examples. This one here, this was from a previous exam. So from primary consumers to secondary consumers, we need to work out what that percentage is. So we've got 76 is the next trophic level divided by the current trophic level times by 100, and that's 5%. So a question might ask us to contrast the efficiency of the biomass transfer between each level of the pyramid. There's 3 marks here and it's contrast to work out what's different. So we need to work out each of these, this transfer and this transfer, work out the efficiency and then determine which one is the most efficient. So 15,200 up to 1,520. So we're going to have 1,520 divided by 15,200 times by 100, and that's going to be 10%. And then this next one is smaller than that. We've already worked that one out. It worked out to be 5%. So from primary consumers to secondary consumers is 5%. So to contrast the efficiency, we would say that producers to primary consumers is more efficient at 10% compared with 5% for primary to secondary. Now we need to then explain the difference in biomass transfer. Explain why it's less efficient as we go further up. energy efficiency tends to be lower further up the food chain, the trophic levels, due to more energy being consumed through cellular respiration and more energy passed on to decomposers as detritus. And these are the answers to those questions. So that gives you an idea of the sorts of questions that will be on the external exam based on this content.